So in humanity, there are 9 ages. The first age starts with our grandparents and earlier. And these are inherited imprints that affect us. Those imprints can be extremely traumatic, like those, for example, associated with the Holocaust, and they could be completely benign in terms of like inherited values. But there's that complete spectrum, and it's coming down to us through our unconscious. So we're not even aware that these things have imprinted on us, and we're not aware where they've come from. Obviously, the Holocaust would be the exception to that. So that's sort of age 1. Age 2 is then, and that tends to be people who are no longer with us. Age 2 is then our parents, and our parents imprint us from the moment of conception onwards. The classic imprints, if dad gets angry and shouts, we might become a shouty person ourselves, or we could be afraid of people who shout, but either way, that's the imprint that lands. Another stereotype, if mother is an anxious worrier, we may become someone who is anxious and worried, not because we were that ourselves, but that's the imprint that's landed on us. Then we get to conception. And conception is interesting because there are cultures around the world who believe that our consciousness was somewhere before it came to us, and it goes somewhere after the physical body has passed away. In my own experience dealing with clients, what I've noticed is people using past lives like a metaphor to distance themselves emotionally for something that's happened to them, so they're able to tell themselves the story to release what's bothering them and move on without having to re-experience something that was personally traumatic. So when I'm working with them, I don't say, past lives don't exist or they don't matter. I just accept whatever comes to the person. Whether I can prove it scientifically or not doesn't matter. What matters is, can the client make the concept work? And if they can make it work to achieve a release, that's good enough for me. And I've had some instances where clients said, their first event for something was at so many months when their mother was pregnant with them. And afterwards they've gone, I didn't know where that came from. They've gone home and they've asked mum, well, what happened while you were expecting me? When I was pregnant, I lost my job, or something happened that was traumatic at the time. Now, whether the mother subsequently told the child or the child experiences, again, we don't know. We can't be that precise. What we do know is that we can go back to that event and release the emotion, and that clears the problem. So then we're born. Some people have very traumatic births, so it's very important to recognize that and clear those things. And that brings to mind a representation a client had, which was extreme noise at birth. And when asked to describe that noise, the client said that it was terrifying. Well, when we pieced together the story, what had actually happened was that the mother had a very difficult end of pregnancy. There were a lot of people in the delivery suite fighting to save both mother's life and baby's life. And what we suspect happened is when the baby was born, there was a spontaneous breakout of cheering and clapping and obviously quite loud noises compared to life inside the womb. And as soon as the client realized that the noise was a celebration of their life and they'd been important enough to have maybe 10 people fighting to save their lives, the fear just evaporated and they were able to move on. So again, can be very, very significant, this particular age. The next one then, we talk about the survival developmental phase. This is when we're governed by our amygdala, our reptilian brain. This is fight, flight time. We don't really have language at this point. We don't have logic at this point. It's just instincts. And what we want is to be warm, to be fed, that kind of baby environment. Baby cries when baby's not happy. So you feed the baby, cuddle the baby, make it comfortable. Then the crying stops. And yeah, that's the basic needs met. And if we don't look after people at this age, they end up with deep-seated, what's called maladaptive schema. These are adaptations they make then when they're making decisions in their limbic brain that come out in their neocortex later, but they have no idea where they've come from. Well, these are imprints that were created very, very early in life. The next stage from 2 is the development of the limbic brain. This is the emotional brain. Again, still we don't have language in the limbic brain, we don't have logic in the limbic brain, just emotion. And then finally the neocortex kicks in from about 8. We're supposed to finish developing our neocortex at about 25, but I think for modern young people who are still at home in their mid-20s, I think it takes longer for the neocortex to finish developing because there aren't the challenges there used to be. You know, leaving home at 16 or 18, you know, getting married, having children at a very young age, getting a job at a young age, finding a house or a flat to live, to buy or to rent. All these major decisions that young people were making on their own back in the day, they no longer make those decisions because they're still living with mum and dad. So I think that's delaying development. And then once we've got out of the conforming stage in the limbic brain, we get into differentiating. So differentiating is 8 onwards, and differentiating is where we want to stand out. So conforming from 2 to 8 is where we're seeking to fit in. We gain acceptance from our family by fitting in, very often with rules that aren't spoken or written down. As some people say, well, they're written on the refrigerator if you look, but we feel safe when we conform with what our family expects of us. After that time when we want to differentiate, well, that means we now seek acceptance by standing out. But we're standing out in our peer group, which is a different group of people. And of course, when you become a teenager, parents are worried that they're losing the family influence, and the influence on you is from outsiders, from strangers that they don't know. So some parents see that as a real threat, and they haven't grounded you before puberty. You can end up with all kinds of maladaptive schema coming out in the teenage years when they're outside the home. So it's very important that we find the problems early and we can release them. Even better if we can educate parents so that we don't create the problems in the first place. So the world of differentiation can go on for the rest of life if we don't individuate. So we should be individuating from about mid to late 20s for people with a really nice liberal upbringing. We might find that happens when they leave school and go to university, but that's pretty early for most people. I would say most people either don't go through individuation, or if they do, they're doing it from about 25 to 30. And then once we've been through that barrier, because individuation is like a barrier, and to get through it, we have to drop the imprints of the past. If we're to become our authentic selves, we have to drop the past. And that's what most people won't do, and therefore they don't develop any further psychologically. So this is when you see, for example, men in their 50s, they wanting to have, you know, big cars, fancy watches, these other sort of things and stuff that to most people are completely meaningless, but they satiate the ego. Well, you're supposed to have got over that stage of your development by the time you're sort of 25. So it's a bit worrying if people are still focused on their ego when they're in their prime of life. And a problem when you see that in business, you've got a CEO who's in this differentiating state, causes all kinds of trouble and not much value for shareholders. And then if we've properly individuated, we then become our authentic selves, and then we're pretty free to follow naturally the remaining stages of psychological development into becoming our authentic selves and going into the collaborating and finally the serving stage, which is the last stage before our natural physical death. So the stage after individuation is where we become our authentic selves. And this is really, really important for human beings because it's where we quite literally create the best version of ourselves. This is the old self-actualization of the past. Women tend to struggle with this stage because there's so many conditions on their development, most of which keep them in a subordinate self-view and subordinate situation. So it's harder for them to break through and self-actualize. They're perfectly capable of self-actualization, but the conditions are different. What's really interesting though is that the next stage beyond self-actualization, beyond becoming your authentic self, is to become a collaborator, to collaborate with others. And this is the stage that women tend to do naturally and where men tend to struggle. So men are used to wanting to be the top dog, the alpha male, but in having to collaborate with others, they may feel under threat and therefore they don't do it. Whereas women have no such qualms and are natural collaborators. So for a woman, it's really important to get through self-actualization to be able to achieve the best results, the best success, the best relationships in their lives happen at this collaborating phase. So collaborating is really interesting. I think Rosabeth Moss-Cancer, the Harvard professor, talked about it best, and I don't remember the exact quote, but what I think she was saying was that this is where 1 + 1 = 3. You can, by collaborating globally, create a huge amount of value. So in the business world, collaboration is strategically really important. The problem is, particularly if you have men leading, is their egos won't let them do it. So if you are on a board watching this, think about, have you got an individuated CEO, or have you got people making excuses for failure to collaborate? Because if you're not collaborating, you're not creating value at sufficient scale. It's really something really important to think about for your organization. Collaboration at a smaller level might come together in clubs and societies where people get together to follow pastimes and so on. And certainly in my lifetime, lots of clubs, football clubs, rugby clubs, cycling clubs, other clubs are sustained by people who volunteer their time. They don't do it for money, they do it for love. And what you'll find is that the best of those people, they're not on social media going, look at me, I give this and I do that. Because the real servers, the real collaborators aren't doing it like differentiators. So if I'm a differentiator, I might claim to be doing something, but my reason for doing it is because I think it'll look good. I think I'll get kudos for my giving back, for my collaborating, and that just completely misses the point. So when we collaborate, we create more abundance around us. Beyond collaboration, we get into serving. And typically in our society, we're only at the serving stage after we've retired, which is a tremendous loss of wisdom. And again, the servers, a bit like the collaborators, the true servers will get on with serving. They won't be boasting about it on social media. And one of the lessons I think we have for society, and this comes from Richard Barrett's work, The New Leadership Paradigm. If you look at professional service firms being a great example, be it management consulting or accounting, these firms have some very capable senior leaders and quite often a mandatory retirement at 55. Well, if you've got properly individuated humans coming out of a global organization at 55, where we should be taking those people is to our public institutions who need resolved, experienced leadership. And because these people have already made their money, they have enough, they have sufficient. So they can lead with the benefit to society in mind, not what's in it for me, which is what we see too much of in all kinds of different scandals in public life. And it's really important that we recognize the value of wisdom when we're looking for leaders to lead in our country, in our public institutions. Life is supposed to be a progression. That progression starts from way before you were born and will continue after your physical death because of your imprints on other people. So what you need to think about is, am I moving? If I'm not moving, then it's highly likely that I haven't individuated. If I haven't individuated, I'm likely still to be in differentiation, which means I'm ruled by my ego, not by my soul. And the thing to ask oneself is then, right, what is it that holds me back? What is it that I feel a lack of? What is this unmet basic need that's tethering me to my own past? And what is it I have to learn to be able to cut that tether and then continue life's journey, become an individuated human and start to self-actualize, which would be the next stage of psychological development for me. And this is what breakthrough is all about. It's about cutting those ties to the past. I call it literally releasing the past. And when you release the past, that's when you start going through individuation. You become consciously aware of yourself and others. That alone makes you more effective in life as well as work and business or in sport. And And it frees you then to start becoming the best version of yourself, and you can get on with the rest of your life. That's really the promise of breakthrough.